going to turn to a conversation about community innovation. And joining me, we will have Jessica Harris, an author and journalist, and an expert on the foodways of the African Diaspora, and a professor emeritus at Queens College. We'll have Karen Washington, a farmer and activist with Rise and Root Farm. And Karen happens to be one of my favorite people on this earth. We're also joined by Rachel Atchison, the Deputy Director of the New York City Mayor's Office on Food Policy, and Cheryl Durant, who is the Board President of Just Food and Food and Agriculture Coordinator for the International Rescue Committee. Give all of these wonderful people a round of applause. Before we begin the conversation, I just want to share a short excerpt of a letter from U.S. Congress member Adriano Espelay, who serves the Bronx. Unfortunately, he could not be with us in person today, but he writes, "Congratulations to the Periodic Table of Food Initiative. I commend each of your organizations for your efforts to promote greater food security and related programs throughout New York's 13th Congressional District, around New York, and in communities across our nation by creating the Symposium of Science Solutions to address the food crisis facing global communities. As you know, biodiversity of food is a critical component of our ecosystems, agricultural systems, and cultural exchange, and we must do all it takes to strengthen our food systems in response to the ongoing climate crisis and other environmental threats facing families around the world." So a big thank you to Congressmember Espelay. Round of applause, please. So now I get to dig into this conversation. I'm really excited to be here with all of you. And Jessica, if I can start with you, as a food historian, I'm wondering if you can talk about how the past shapes the future when we're talking about foodways and biodiversity.
Well,
good morning.
Good morning. First of all, don't belong on this panel. I am not a community leader. I am a food historian by avocation. I am neither scientist nor botanist nor any of those things. However, most people who know me know I always have something to say. So, couple of things that I've been thinking about. There is a quote that is sometimes attributed to Amadou Hampâté Bâ, and that's sometimes considered to be an African proverb. My specialty is Africa and the food of the African diaspora, specifically in the Western Hemisphere. That quote is simply, when an old person dies in Africa, it's as though a library has burned. Clearly, what we're talking about in varying forms today is looking at how the first world is looking to the third world to heal it, which is interesting because the third world is also seemingly under fire from the botanical assault of the globalization of the Western diet. So that kind of puts it in a nutshell.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's the historical point of view of that. If you look back at that, you see all sorts of things that have happened. Just in general, if you look at what has happened post-contact on the African continent, New World plants that may be faster growing, but that are not necessarily as nutritionally sound, have supplanted traditional plants. We're looking at a variety of kinds of destruction, cultural destruction in a variety of ways. So that would be the first, the whole idea of looking at the past and letting the past inform the future. I think there is all of that at work.
That going forward by going back and looking at those traditional cultures and traditional crops is very important. I'm wondering, Jessica, how does the New York Botanical Gardens African American Garden offer an eater to see some of this work up close and to recognize the history, the violence against the land, the violence against people, but also what opportunity there is now for healing?
Okay, well, first of all, for those of you who don't know that there is an African American garden, let's start there. Bless you. For the past 3 years, we have been working at the Barnsley beds, and they're being planted now. You can go get a sense of what they will be, but not really the full garden, on planting a 3-year project of African American garden. The first year was an African American garden. African American is a term that we in the United States thinks only applies to this country, whereas, interestingly, it applies to this hemisphere. So the first garden was a United Statesian up from the South African American garden, and in it we had about 80 different plants. It's not just a food plant garden, it's a garden that celebrates everything from food, obviously, to curing and conjuring, to all sorts of things like making and mending that are covered within the rubric of plants and what we as Africans in diaspora do with plants. The second year, which was last year, we went from 80 plants to 140 plants.
Wow.
We had one bed that was planted as a conuco, conucos being the particular system of growing used in the Caribbean that harks back to native Caribbean peoples and that looks at growing plants in symbiotic harmony so that it looks like a wild garden, but it's a very well-planned wild garden. And this year, the garden will open on the 15th of June, sort of shameless plug, please come. We are trying to keep it down to 200 plants. So clearly we have found a degree of biodiversity, a degree of just, I think in French when I get excited, foisonnement, just sort of blooming and of growing and of all kinds of things that hadn't really been thought of. Last year's garden was the Caribbean experience. This year's garden is simply called Diaspora with the subtitle, same boat, different stops. So we are, thank you for getting it. Okay, so the idea is that we are looking at all of that growing. This year we have not only our conuco, but we have added an azotea, a kind of traditional raised bed. I see the church saying amen over there. So the whole thing is, what we are trying to do is, in some cases, to reacquaint people who may have been separated from traditional things with those things, but equally to just allow us to savor and to see and to celebrate all of the things that the African American hand has brought, has nurtured, has enabled in this hemisphere.
Thank you, Jessica. We definitely, please give her a round of applause. I do feel like we need more of that celebration of what has been lost and what is being regained, so that, as you said, people can savor it and enjoy it and bring it back to life. And I do feel like the garden expresses sort of the sense of empowerment that is coming and blooming and growing, as you said. So, Cheryl, that makes me want to turn to you, because you have talked about how empowering it can be for communities to be able to grow culturally relevant foods that their grandparents, and their great-grandparents were growing and ate. And that is something you try to focus on at New Roots Community Garden. Can you talk more about the importance of eating foods that are important to one's culture, and how that, I keep using this word, but how that joy is needed?
When I got here, I've been listening to other people talk. I was wondering to myself, with all these scientists and practitioners, what I could contribute to the conversation. But community engagement in growing food is integrally very, very important. Yeah. And if we're going to talk about biodiversity, and if we're going to talk about getting people to connect to their own health and well-being, then people have to become involved in growing their own food. And then we have to talk about bigger issues around land and land access. Mm-hmm. People have to have access to land so they can grow their own food. That's where the food security part comes in. That's where the food sovereignty part comes in. And then we have a bigger picture about what does your landscape look like, your urban landscape look like. The way New York is set up, it's not set up for people to have health and well-being. Right. it disconnects us from the land, it disconnects us from each other, and as I like to say, everyone in New York City is mentally unstable because of that. So, it's not just about, growing your own food and growing diverse food. It's about a much bigger picture of what does the global landscape look like, so that all these things that all these practitioners are talking about, we can actually do. Because one of the things that struck me was that I'm hearing the stories, but I'm not hearing the stories from the people who are actually doing the work. And I'm looking at the audience, and I'm like, where are my friends? I see Karen, I see Tony, but where are the other practitioners that are actually doing this work? Why aren't they here telling that story? Because if they're not telling their own story about the work that they're doing in bringing back biodiversity and healthy food crops, then the conversation is disconnected. Right. And that is important, that those people that are doing the work can tell you about the biodiversity of the crops. I'm thinking about New Roots Community Farm. I'm like, what a biodiverse environment that we have created in a concrete jungle. And a lot of people don't know about it. Right. The work is already being done here. And people don't come and visit, and people don't connect to it. And people don't talk to us about our stories. Right. It's unusual that you have invited me to come here to talk about my story, because usually people don't want to hear my story.
I always want to hear your story.
So, there's nothing more to add to that than the people who are doing the work, who can actually make that fundamental change, need to be the ones up here telling that story.
Agreed. Thank you. Round of applause for that, please. We need more practitioners and community members in rooms like this one telling their own stories. I'm so glad you were able to bring that up. Karen, if I can turn to you, Cheryl talked a little bit about land access, and you know better than anyone that communities hold so much knowledge around diverse foods, diverse ways of farming. They know the solutions. I've heard this more than once from you. They know how to build resilience. What they lack, and this is especially in low income and Black and brown communities, they've been marginalized and ignored. So I'm hoping you can talk about the kind of investment and capital that these communities need so that they can grow their own food, that they can regain that connection.
Thank you so much for having me, Cheryl. Thank you so much for bringing it about to community, because for me, sitting here listening, we talked about biodiversity, we talked about crop diversity, but for me, it's about farmer diversity. I'm here in the United States where Black farmers are diminishing. We have less than 1% of farmland. We don't have the capital to buy land. We don't have the capital to buy equipment. And so if we're talking about a food system that's fair and just, we have to make sure that the people who are growing the food, that there is an opportunity for them to be able to invest in the community. And so for me, I've asked time and time again, when people say, is the food system broken and needs to be fixed? Some of y'all say, yeah, it needs to be fixed. For me, I said, no. It's not broken. It's a caste system doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing, keeping people of color, fast food, junk food, processed food. And so for me, it doesn't need to be fixed. It needs to change. And that change comes into the power of the community. But people with power and privilege, they don't want to give up their power and privilege, because power and privilege is like a drug. It's like, I'm not going to give my power and privilege to somebody that I don't even know. But I tell people with power and privilege, you got three things. Number one, you can share it. Maybe a good idea. You can give it up. Or it's going to be taken away, and that's going to be the new food revolution. But we're not there yet. And so what people that look like me, what are we asking for? We're asking for our hands in the soil. We're asking for resources of capital to purchase land. And then we talk also about seed saving. People, we talk on this panel, why is it that we have a handful of companies patenting seeds? We're talking about seed diversity, but we have companies that patent seeds. And if you patent seeds, because aren't seeds part of our DNA? So if we're patenting seeds, what is going to happen to the human body? That's number one. And how have we allowed this to happen? And so sitting on this stage today, I want to give big ups to, first of all, the Bronx Green Up program, because In times of need, the Bronx ranks 62 out of 62 counties in the Bronx ranks 62 as the most unhealthiest. And yet you have a program that has been out there really helping community gardens to be diverse in their food, diverse in their culture. There is no agriculture without culture. That's number one. And number two, when we talked about storytelling, they have gone through community gardens to tell the story from the elders on how they got here, how they went to the land, and what they brought back that knowledge. And the third and last thing I want to say, during COVID, when the city told all the community gardens to shut down, it was Bronx Green Up with the community gardens to form the Bronx Farm Hub because we knew the importance of growing food and feeding our community. Until this day, we continue to do the work.
Thank you so much, Karen. We not only need diversity of crops, we need diversity of farmers. Thank you for saying that out loud. Rachel, if I can turn to you, Karen mentioned this huge need for change, right? Part of that has to come from policy, and it often doesn't come quickly enough. But the mayor's office has a 10-year plan, and I'd love for you to talk about what you're thinking around food over that decade.
Yeah, absolutely. And I find that today the focus on plants is actually incredibly relevant to this mayor's office. We have a very plant-forward approach, and so as I was listening to several of the speakers this morning, it just reinvigorated the need for more diversity in what we're eating. And I think we've leaned very heavily on community partners, such as I'm seeing Wellness in the Schools here with our school food work. We have leaned on Hot Bread Kitchen for culinary training on Rikers Island. We are really trying to transform our city government procurement to have a values-based good food purchasing framework. There are a lot of values within that that we're trying to champion and move forward. And so the 10-year food plan, we just released our 2-year progress report last summer, and it's something that we're very proud of in leading, mostly inside city government. City government is responsible for feeding our students, those in hospitals, in jails, in homeless shelters, going to older adult centers, and it's where we've been able to lead.
Can you talk about the co-design process, like with the people on this stage? This is something that the city can't do alone. It shouldn't do alone. It should have communities leading this. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so we've leaned a ton on our community partners. I've named a couple, but we, in developing our 10-year food plan, I think probably a third of the room was approached around it, and we're continuing to lean on those community partners. I see in our food education work, we released a food education roadmap last year because when we decided to add more options into the cafeteria, we noticed that it wasn't just about putting things on the cafeteria, but it was also about what are students being taught in classes? What is the curriculum? How does that support healthier, more sustainable choices? And so New York City has a wonderful food education ecosystem of about 50 plus groups that are doing the work on the ground, and we are trying to uplift them. We now list them on our website. We have an Airtable. We're constantly trying to get word to our schools through our Department of Education central office, and we are trying to uplift that work so that all teachers, all students, communities can know about the resources that New York City has to offer, because this is such a vibrant food community.
Rachel, and I'm wondering, when you're working with communities, or you're working with Cheryl or Karen, what are the most important things that you're hearing?
I'd say to listen to them. I'd say we have leaned on them to provide us information on how to go about changing the food system. The amount of times that we have phone calls, conference calls, video calls with local organizations who are leading and doing the work and hearing and then pivoting, because I think exactly what we need in the food system is change, and it might not be monumental overnight, but these small pivots that we continue to do and continue to stress to our partners in government are instrumental, and we've been able to learn a ton by listening.
Thank you so much. Jessica, go ahead, Cheryl.
Yeah, I think the connection to schools and food is very important. It is not just bringing healthy foods to school cafeterias. It's also connected the intersection between children and how food is actually grown. So our work has connected with the MOUA, which is the Mayor's Office of Urban Agriculture, in the Food to School program, where this semester and next semester we will have children come to the gardens and farms and see how we grow food. And then we're going to connect that as well to the our community chef training program through Just Food, so they can see how food is prepared and how they can take these lessons back to their own families and deepen that connection to food and deepen that connection to connecting healthy food. And what I wish would also happen is that every school should have a garden.
Right, right.
You know, and the curriculum of schools should be taught. This is just my feeling, through the lens of food, and the lens of growing food, and the lens of land access, because that is a huge paradigm shift in getting us to where we want to go.
Absolutely, absolutely. Go
And,
ahead.
and
quickly.
we do know that the mayor has often said that if kids grow food, they're more likely to eat the food. And so Mayor's Office of Urban Agriculture has done a wonderful job in leading that work with our Office of Food and Nutrition Services. But to your point, we don't have a food class. And so how do we integrate food into the curriculum so that they're learning, 1 apple plus 1 apple equals 2 apples? There are ways to...
I want it to be the curriculum.
Yeah. Oh, we're working on it. We're working on it. So within Jeremy Walter, who leads the food education implementation, we are trying to we are building and learning from the partners in the space that by 9th grade, students will have learned about the checkoff program and about the marketing within the food industry. We are trying to make sure that is in the curriculum.
Yeah.
I just want to say
please.
quickly that the new Botanical Garden has the Edible Academy, which schools do come and they are taught about ways of growing food, which is really important. I want to put that plug in.
Well, and of course. So Jessica and Karen, Rachel and Cheryl have been talking about what needs to be taught in school, but food definitely needs to be part of the curriculum. I want to stay on that topic for a minute, but the history of food needs to be part of that, and the history of how communities have been using food for empowerment needs to be part of that. How do we include that in the curriculum?
Well, I mean, I think, and there I actually might have a little expertise. I taught at Queens College for 50, that would be 50 years.
Wow.
So I think that what we forget is people eat. If we don't eat, we die. So everything can be taught through the lens of food. Mm-hmm. History can be taught through the lens of food. Mathematics, you talked about 1 apple plus 2 pineapples. Okay, all of these things can be taught through the lens of food, or with the addition of the lens of food. I think change is always gradual, much as I would like it to be radical. But I think that just if you read Columbus's diaries and then interpret them, look at that. Look at what he ate when he ate with the caciques. Look at what he ate when he was doing things. It's all there. Damn near everybody has kept a journal, because we're human. We eat, and if we're not eating, we're worrying about what we're going to eat next. So that's what you start by looking at. Research start that way. Mm-hmm. All of those things. We can talk about enslavement. We can talk about the slave ships. Look at the provisioning lists.
Right.
Look at that thing that used to be called the Columbian Exchange, but that now is being seen more as a world in transition. When people hear, no tomatoes in Italy until, they remember that. Then they begin to think about and maybe remember why. So all of those things are ways that food could be implemented across the curriculum, from pre-K through high school, through college.
Absolutely, and beyond. Go ahead,
I
Karen.
just want to add something that's so simple that everyone can do it. Because when I speak to young kids, I always say to them, if you're lucky to have a grandparent, a great-grandparent, or uncle or aunt, tia or tio, take out those Samsung Galaxies and iPhone and have them talk about what it was growing food in their homeland, what it was growing food in the garden, because if you don't capture those stories, that's your legacy. If you don't capture those stories, people will tell you 10 years from now, your family never grew anything. And so it's something simple like that.
Yeah.
To hold those stories and the importance of storytelling. You know, we sit around the table, that's what we talk about. Food is something that we all can sort of get around and sit down and talk about our relationship to food, our relationship to land, our relationship to family, our relationship to community, which is so, so important.
Thank you so much. So important to have that knowledge kept with us. We just have about a minute and 40 seconds left, and I'm wondering if you all can, I know.
It's right here.
As we think about the future of our food systems, what do you want this audience to take away from this conversation? Cheryl, can I start with you? I know.
It is important that we center the people in our communities that are responsible for bringing food to our table. Not to overlook them. That is essential. They know what they want, and they know how to bring it to us, and we have time and time again disregarded them.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Rachel.
Building community around the need to change our food system is integral in making sure that it changes. And so we've seen that in our school food work, we are seeing that in our jail food work, and it needs to continue. The fight needs to persist.
Be proactive instead of reactive, and if you see injustice, call it out.
Jessica, final word.
Oh, I get the last word. Okay, food connects us all. It is our literal umbilicus. And the final word, without food, we die.
Thank you to this panel. If you could all stand for a picture for our photographer, and I'll just...
I can't believe you did that in 30 minutes.
Thank you all so much. Please keep giving them a round of applause. Is the photographer coming? While they're getting their picture taken.